A neat diddle is this. A friend holds one of the diddler's promises to pay, filled up and signed in due form upon the ordinary blanks printed in red ink. The diddler purchases 1 or 2 dozen of these blanks, and every day dips one of them in his soup, makes his dog jump for it, and finally gives it to him as a bonne bouche. The note arriving at maturity, the diddler with the diddler's dog calls upon the friend, and the promise to pay is made the topic of discussion. The friend produces it from his escritoire, and is in the act of reaching it to the diddler, when up jumps the diddler's dog, and devours it forthwith. The diddler is not only surprised, vexed, and incensed at the absurd behavior of his dog, and expresses his entire readiness to cancel the obligation at any moment, when the evidence of the obligation shall be forthcoming. A very minute diddle is this. A lady is insulted in the street by a diddler's accomplice. The diddler himself flies to her assistance, and giving his friend a comfortable thrashing, insists upon attending the lady to her own door. He bows with his hand upon his heart, and most respectfully bids her adieu. She entreats him, as her deliverer, to walk in and be introduced to her big brother and her papa. With a sigh, he declines to do so. "Is there no way then, sir," she murmurs, "in which I may be permitted to testify my gratitude?" "Why, yes, madam, there is. Will you be kind enough to lend me a couple of shillings?" In the first excitement of the moment, the lady decides upon fainting outright. Upon second thought, however, she opens her purse strings, and delivers the specie. Now this, I say, is a diddle minute. For one entire moiety of the sum borrowed has to be paid to the gentleman who had the trouble of performing the insult, and who had then to stand still and be thrashed for performing it. Rather a small, but still a scientific diddle is this. The diddler approaches the bar of a tavern, and demands a couple of twists of tobacco. These are handed to him, when, having slightly examined them, he says, "I don't much like this tobacco. Here, take it back, and give me a glass of brandy and water in its place." The brandy and water is furnished and imbibed, and the diddler makes his way to the door, but the voice of the tavern keeper arrests him. "I believe, sir, you have forgotten to pay for your brandy and water." "Pay for my brandy and water? I didn't give you the tobacco for the brandy and water. I didn't give you the tobacco for the brandy and water? What more would you have?" "But, sir, if you please, I don't remember that you paid me for the tobacco." "What do you mean by that, you scoundrel? Didn't I give you back your tobacco? Isn't that your tobacco lying there? Do you expect me to pay for what I did not take?" "But, sir," says the publican, now rather at a loss what to say. "But, sir—" "But me no buts, sir," interrupts the diddler, apparently in very high dudgeon, and slamming the door after him as he makes his escape. "But me no buts, sir, and none of your tricks upon travellers." Here again is a very clever diddle, of which the simplicity is not its least recommendation. A purse or pocket-book being really lost, the loser inserts in one of the daily papers of a large city a fully descriptive advertisement, whereupon our diddler copies the facts of this advertisement with a change of heading, of general phraseology and address. The original, for instance, is long and verbose, is headed "A Pocket-Book Lost," and requires the treasure, when found, to be left at No. 1 Tom Street. The copy is brief, and being headed with "Lost" only indicates No. 2 Dick, or No. 3 Harry Street, as the locality in which the owner may be seen. Moreover, it is inserted in at least 5 or 6 of the daily papers of the day, while in point of time it makes its appearance only a few hours after the original. Should it be read by the loser of the purse, he would hardly suspect it to have any reference to his own misfortune, but of course the chances are 5 or 6 to 1 that the finder will repair to the address given by the diddler, rather than to that pointed out by the rightful proprietor. The former pays the reward, pockets the treasure, and decamps. Quite an analogous diddle is this. A lady of ton has dropped somewhere in the street a diamond ring of very unusual value. For its recovery she offers some $40 or $50 reward, giving in her advertisement a very minute description of the gem, and of its settings, and declaring that on its restoration at No. so-and-so, in such and such avenue, the reward will be paid instanter, without a single question being asked. During the lady's absence from home, a day or two afterwards, a ring is heard at the door. of number so-and-so, in such and such avenue. A servant appears. The lady of the house is asked for, and is declared to be out, at which astounding information the visitor expresses the most poignant regret. The business is of importance and concerns the lady herself. In fact, he had the good fortune to find her diamond ring, but perhaps it would be as well that he should call again. By no means, says the servant, and by no means, says the lady's sister and the lady's sister-in-law. You are summoned forthwith. The ring is clamorously identified, the reward is paid, and the finder nearly thrust out of doors. The lady returns and expresses some little dissatisfaction with her sister and sister-in-law because they happen to have paid $40 or $50 for a facsimile of her diamond ring, a facsimile made out of real pinchbeck and unquestionable paste. But, as there is really no end to diddling, so there would be none to this essay, were I even to hint at half the variations or inflections of which this science is susceptible. I must bring this paper perforce to a conclusion, and this I cannot do better than by a summary notice of a very decent but rather elaborate diddle, of which our own city was made the theatre, not very long ago, and which was subsequently repeated with success in other still more verdant localities of the Union. A middle-aged gentleman arrives in town from parts unknown. He is remarkably precise, cautious, staid, and deliberate in his demeanor. His dress is scrupulously neat, but plain, unostentatious. He wears a cravat, an ample waistcoat made with an eye to comfort alone, thick-soled, cozy-looking shoes and pantaloons without straps. He has the whole air, in fact, of your well-to-do, sober-sided, exact, and respectable man of business, par excellence. One of the stern and outwardly hard, internally soft sort of people that we see in the crack-high comedies. Fellows whose words are so many bonds, and who are noted for giving away guineas in charity with the one hand, while in the way of mere bargain they exact the uttermost fraction of a farthing with the other. He makes much ado before he can get suited with a boarding-house. He dislikes children. He has been accustomed to quiet. His habits are methodical, and he would prefer getting into a private and respectable small family, piously inclined. Terms, however, are no object. Only he must insist upon settling his bill on the 1st of every month. It is now the 2nd, and begs his landlady, when he finally obtains one to his mind, not on any account to forget his instructions upon this point, but to send in a bill and receipt precisely at 10 o'clock on the 1st day of every month, and under no circumstances to put it off to the 2nd. These arrangements made, our man of business rents an office in a reputable rather than a fashionable quarter of the town. There is nothing he more despises than pretense. Where there is much show, he says, there is seldom anything very solid behind, an observation which so profoundly impresses his landlady's fancy that she makes a pencil memorandum of it forthwith in her great family Bible, on the broad margin of the Proverbs of Solomon. The next step is to advertise after some such fashion as this in the principal business 6 pennies of the city. The pennies are eschewed as not respectable, and as demanding payment for all advertisements in advance. Our man of business holds it as a point of his faith that work should never be paid for until done. Wanted. The advertisers, being about to commence extensive business operations in this city, will require the services of 3 or 4 intelligent and competent clerks, to whom a liberal salary will be paid. The very best recommendations, not so much for capacity as for integrity, will be expected, indeed, as the duties to be performed involve high responsibilities and large amounts of money must necessarily pass through the hands of those engaged. It is deemed advisable to demand a deposit of $50 from each clerk employed. No person need apply, therefore, who is not prepared to leave this sum in the possession of the advertisers, and who cannot furnish the most satisfactory testimonials of morality. Young gentlemen piously inclined will be preferred. Application should be made between the hours of 10 and 11 a.m. and 4 and 5 p.m. of Messrs. Boggs, Hoggs, Logs, Frogs, and Company, number 110 Dog Street. By the 31st day of the month, this advertisement has brought to the office of Messrs. Boggs, Hoggs, Logs, Frogs, and Company some 15 or 20 young gentlemen piously inclined, But our man of business is in no hurry to conclude a contract with any. No man of business is ever precipitate, and it is not until the most rigid catechism in respect to the piety of each young gentleman's inclination that his services are engaged and his $50 receipted for just by way of proper precaution on the part of the respectable firm of Boggs, Hoggs, Logs, Frogs, and Company. On the morning of the first day of the next month, the landlady does not present her bill, according to promise, a piece of neglect for which the comfortable head of those of the house ending in Oggs would no doubt have chided her severely, could he have been prevailed upon to remain in town a day or two for that purpose. As it is, the constables have had a sad time of it, running hither and thither, and all they can do is to declare the man of business most emphatically a hen knee-high, by which some persons imagine them to imply that, in fact, he is N-E-I, by which, again, the very classical phrase non est inventus is supposed to be understood. In the meantime, the young gentlemen, one and all, are somewhat less piously inclined than before, while the landlady purchases a shilling's worth of the best Indian rubber, and very carefully obliterates the pencil memorandum that some fool has made in her great family Bible on the broad margin of the Proverbs of Solomon.